Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into some honestly kind of scary news in the world of international development. We got a bunch of articles about some pretty big changes proposed for USA, and luckily our expert is here to, well, help us figure out what it all means, especially for universities both here and, around the world.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot to unpack. Could have some pretty big ripple effects, especially when you think about all the stuff universities do with USAID.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, one article talked about this USA project in Kenya. They're working with the university over there to teach farmers how to use these special farming techniques so they can grow food even when there's not a lot of rain. But with all these budget cuts they're talking about, I mean, who knows if that project will even, be able to continue. And there are tons of projects like that, right?
Yeah, totally. That's a really good example of what we're talking about, like the actual impact this could have on the ground. But before we get too deep into all that, maybe we should back up a sec. For anyone who maybe doesn't know, can you give us a quick, like, what is USAID?
Oh, yeah, sure. USAID stands for the United States Agency for International Development. It was started way back in 1961 by President Kennedy.
Oh, that's interesting. It was actually part of this whole Cold War strategy. Back then the U.S. was trying to boost its influence in developing countries.
Ah, so it's like foreign aid, but also like geopolitics at the same time. Makes sense. So what does USAID actually like do these days?
Well, their main mission is to uh, provide foreign aid to countries with lower or middle incomes.
Mm.
That aid can be, a lot of things. Like sometimes it's humanitarian assistance or disaster relief. Sometimes it's about helping a country's economy grow or making their healthcare system better.
So it's not just about like giving money away, it's about tackling all these huge global problems.
Exactly. And that's actually where universities come in. USID always says that um, higher education, colleges and stuff are super important for their work.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Tell me more about that. Like, what does that actually look like? Universities working with USA.
Well, for one thing, USAID helps build up universities in developing countries. Like, give them support so they can become stronger. That could mean training teachers, coming up with new courses, or even like funding research projects.
So, like, helping those universities get better, more, I guess, more self-sufficient. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, you have American universities that actually work directly with USAID on specific projects. Like, I don't know, think about developing new vaccines for diseases that don't get a lot of attention or researching, new ways to adapt to climate change, maybe even creating programs to help women start their own businesses. Lots of stuff like that.
Wow. That's pretty amazing, the range of stuff they work on. One of the articles said that USAID works with, like, hundreds of universities all over the world.
Yeah, that's right. Just in 2023, USID supported 830 universities in tons of different countries, and they were able to reach almost 100,000 students. Plus, they help publish all these research articles, which adds to, global knowledge and all that.
Wow, that's huge. Okay, well, I guess it's time to address the, elephant in the room. The Trump administration's proposed changes, the articles you sent, paint a pretty serious picture.
Yeah, yeah. The scariest part is probably the budget cuts. And they're not small cuts, like, at all. We could be talking about cutting the USAID workforce from 14,000 employees down to, like, less than 300.
Wait, under 300 down from 14,000? That's not even a cut. That's more like, I don't know, an amputation or something. I mean, what's the logic behind a cut that big?
Well, Elon Musk, he's the one running the Department of Government Efficiency now, and he's been really vocal about his, let's say, dislike of USAID. He even called it a criminal organization at one point, but no one really knows what he meant by that.
Huh, yeah, that definitely sounds suspicious. But even setting that aside, a cut that huge would basically make it impossible for USAID to do its job, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. They've already put hundreds of contracts on hold, and there are something like 800 grants that might be canceled altogether.
Wow. So all those projects, like the one in Kenya, are basically just hanging in limbo right now. But before we get into the specifics of how all this would affect things, what reasons are they giving for these drastic cuts? What's the official story?
Well, President Trump has said that he thinks foreign aid is often not good for America. He says sometimes it even goes against American values. The plan, as it stands right now, seems to be to just give whatever's left of USAID to the State Department to handle.
Wow, that's a pretty big change. And I get, wanting the government to be more efficient, but cutting the agency that handles all of U.S. foreign aid by like 90% seems, well, I don't know, pretty extreme to say the least. Especially if you think that all the universities that rely on USAID.
Yeah, for sure. And the impact on those universities could be, well, it could be pretty bad. But to really get into what might happen, we need to look more closely at all the different ways universities and US-wide work together.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's try to figure out this whole web of partnerships and what's at stake for higher education.
Okay, so yeah, like we were saying, universities are like baked into how USI does its work.
Yeah.
They're involved in a ton of different ways. Remember that project in Kenya we talked about? The one focused on sustainable agriculture? That's a good example of USA teaming up with a local university to, help that country build up its own expertise and resources.
Right, right. And that article we read said the project was really helping farmers adapt to climate change and, improve their lives. It seemed like they were making some serious progress.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the main things to understand about these partnerships with universities. It's often about working directly with communities, tackling super specific problems that people are facing on the ground.
And if those partnerships suddenly get disrupted, or even worse, completely shut down because of budget cuts, well, those communities are going to lose a lot of crucial support and resources, right?
Definitely. And it's not just about the immediate impact either. Things like capacity building, stuff like training faculty and developing new courses, that stuff has like long-term benefits for a country's development.
It's like an investment in the future, right? Creates a ripple effect that goes way beyond just the initial project.
Exactly. And that's actually one of the reasons it's so hard to really measure how much of an impact these university partnerships have. The results might not be obvious for years, even decades sometimes.
Yeah, but just because we can't, put a number on the impact right away doesn't mean it's not important, right?
Exactly. And then there are all the American universities that are super involved in research that's funded by USAID. Think about developing new vaccines and treatments for diseases, coming up with new technologies for agriculture, even making breakthroughs in renewable energy. Universities are leading the way in all those areas.
And a lot of times that research has global implications, right? It doesn't just benefit the specific countries USAID is working in, it helps the whole world.
Totally. And, we can't forget about the education side of things either. A lot of American universities offer programs in international development, and USAID grants often help support students who want to build a career in that field.
Oh, that's right. So cutting funding could actually, discourage the next generation of development professionals from, even getting started.
Yeah, that's a real concern. If universities don't have as many chances to do international development work, it might make students think twice about going into those areas.
It kind of makes me think about brain drain, how talented people from developing countries often end up moving to wealthier countries for better opportunities. Could these cuts make that problem even worse?
It's definitely possible. And that would be a huge loss, not just for those individuals, but for the countries they could be helping to develop if they stayed.
Man, it's kind of crazy and a little depressing how all this stuff is connected. These cuts could have this domino effect, impacting everything from local communities to global research to the very pipeline of future development experts.
Yeah, it's this tangled web, and that's why it's so important to try to understand the whole scope of what might happen.
It just occurred to me as we've been talking. Remember that article that mentioned how 37 senators were totally against shutting down USAID? They said that scaling back USAID could create this vacuum that other countries might try to fill.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And those senators, they specifically called out China, Russia, and Iran as countries that might jump in to take advantage of the situation.
So it's not just about the U.S. stepping back from its role in global development. It could be about giving more influence to countries that have totally different values and goals, right?
Exactly. And that raises a whole bunch of new questions. What would it mean for those countries to have more power in shaping development? Would they actually be focused on what's best for the U.S. or even for the people in the communities they're working with?
Honestly, it's kind of scary to think about. Makes this whole situation seem even more serious.
Yeah, for sure. Adds a whole other layer to things. And it really highlights how important the geopolitical side of things is. You know, people often forget about that when they talk about foreign aid.
I realize we've been focusing a lot on how bad these cuts could be, but we should also mention that USA has its fair share of critics. Some people say the agency is wasteful, inefficient, and that they play politics too much.
Right, right. There are these conservative groups like the Heritage Foundation that have been saying we should cut foreign aid for years. They like to point to examples of corruption or times when USA programs were mismanaged, as proof that the whole system is broken.
So for them, these cuts are about, making the government spend less, getting rid of unnecessary bureaucracy, and making sure that all that aid money is actually being used well.
Yeah, exactly. And they also say that USAID is pushing a liberal agenda that, in their opinion, doesn't match up with American values. They see this as a chance to, realign foreign aid with their own political priorities.
It's interesting how this whole debate about USAID is basically a reflection of, the bigger political divides we have in the US. It seems like everyone's looking at this through their own, like, ideological lens.
It's a super politicized issue, that's for sure. But it's important to recognize that these different opinions are out there, even if we don't agree with them.
For sure. It's about understanding the whole picture,
Yeah.
recognizing that there are legitimate arguments on both sides.
Exactly. In the end, it's up to each person to look at the evidence, consider all the different perspectives, and then decide what they think.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the big picture, but I want to bring it back down to earth for a minute. What do all these changes mean for the people who actually rely on USAID programs?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It's tough to say exactly how it'll play out for individuals, but we can look at where USAID is working and get a general idea of what the consequences might be.
Okay, so what can you tell us about, the countries and communities that are probably going to be hit hardest by these cuts?
Well, one of the articles listed the top 10 countries that got the most USAID assistance in 2023. At the very top was Ukraine, then there was Ethiopia, Jordan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Yemen, Afghanistan, Nigeria, South Sudan, and Syria.
Wow, that's a pretty diverse list of countries. And they're dealing with a lot of different challenges, too. I mean, everything from wars and humanitarian disasters to, like, extreme poverty and not having access to basic needs.
Yep, that's right. And in a lot of these countries, USA programs are the ones providing essential support for things like, food security, healthcare, education, even building up their infrastructure.
So if those programs get scaled back, or even worse, completely disappear, that could be devastating for millions of people.
It's a huge concern. And we can't forget that these programs usually focus on the most vulnerable people, the ones who are already barely getting by.
It's just, I don't know, it's heartbreaking to think about all that potential suffering, And it really makes you realize the human cost of all these decisions. It really does. Makes you stop and think about all the real people who could be hurt by these decisions. We've been talking about all these big numbers and global strategies, but in the end, it comes down to people trying to survive, people dealing with these really tough problems.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. It's easy to lose sight of that when you're talking about foreign aid. But we got to remember that every dollar we're talking about is like an investment in somebody's life, in their health, their education, their future.
It really hits home, how these policy decisions, the stuff they decide in Washington, can have such a huge impact on people all over the world.
And that's exactly why it's so important to, stay informed and stay involved. These proposed changes to USAID are still up in the air. Nothing's decided yet.
So what can people do if they want to learn more about this or, maybe even get involved somehow?
Well, first off, don't just read the headlines. Dig a little deeper and find out what USAID actually does. Look into the specific programs they have, the partnerships they're working on, and see what connects with you, whether it's global health, food security, education, whatever you care about most.
Yeah, do your own research, figure out what's really at stake here.
Exactly. And once you've done that, there are a bunch of ways to, make your voice heard. You can contact your representatives and tell them what you think about these proposed changes. Or you can support organizations that are doing international development work. You can donate money, volunteer your time, stuff like that.
So there are options for people who want to, be more active and options for people who want to work more behind the scenes.
Exactly. And remember, a lot of times change starts locally. Look for opportunities to get involved in your own community. Like you could support refugee resettlement programs or promote fair trade practices, or even just try to raise awareness about global issues.
Those are some great ideas. It's all about finding a way to, connect the things you're passionate about with action. Make a difference however you can.
And as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought. We've been talking a lot about the U.S. and its role in global development, but it's really important to remember that development isn't just about one country or one organization. It's got to be a team effort. It takes collaboration, partnerships, and a shared commitment to building a better future for everybody.
That's a great point. Thanks for helping us understand this whole complicated and honestly fascinating topic. Definitely gave us a lot to think about.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay engaged with the world around you.